Yeah, again, I don't know. I think there's something to be said about the fact that we need to interrogate and understand the roots of the culture that we live in today. And the types of attitudes and sensibilities that we have are somehow connected to those things. But because our lives sort of exist at more of the cosmetic level, we don't really see the connection between those thinkers and the types of attitudes that we've absorbed. Most people don't know the sort of underpinnings of the types of commitments that they have or
Yeah,
where they emerge from. Many people fancy themselves as very creative and critical thinkers,
yeah.
but all they've done is basically done a sort of unconscious taqleed, right, to whatever held cultural authority and weight in their sort of sociological moment and their political moment. And I think that's something that's
It's
worth.
also the logical conclusions. Like if you agree with a certain set of logical conclusions, especially when it comes to things like critical race theory, right? Things that we've talked about on our podcast. Um, there's when you agree with many different conclusions, you start understanding um, some of the underpinnings of these philosophies, right? And then you're like, oh, okay, well, this coincides with other conclusions I've made regarding X, Y, and Z. So hence, those underpinnings might also. I'm not saying in all cases, but there it could be. That might be why what Zaychaka was alluding to when he was, talking about that. No, but these.
Well, I
Go
think
ahead.
I think what you're seeing happen in the U.S., right? If you sort of look at the trajectory of the West and the United States in particular, from World War II to basically today, you've had this consistent motif of a progressing society. That if we sort of viewed the United States from that period till now, and we judged it against quality of life metrics and things like that, we find consistent improvement overall, right? We are, the GDP is rising, becoming more economically viable. We're minimizing unemployment. We can debate whether or not culturally the society is improving and their morals are improving because you have things like the sexual revolution and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, there's sort of a broader vindication of the fact that we are reaching new heights that we haven't previously. And as a result of that, we're sort of the pioneers of the entire world.
Yeah.
What you're seeing over the last couple of years is a destabilization of that prior conviction, largely because Americans are coming to the realization that society isn't in a continual mode of progress and that we may actually be much closer to periods of decline and regression than many of us know. And so we're seeing a decline in quality of life across America. And with that, you're seeing a number of social realities that are coming to the fore that are exacerbated and intensified from how they were previously. So you're seeing fewer people get married, fewer people enter into family life. You're seeing few people who have faith, right? Very few people have faith today. And you have the proliferation of effectively individuals who commit to nothing, right? They identify themselves as the nuns. They have no religious affiliation whatsoever. And what that does is it leads to a type of destabilization, right? There are a lot of theories as to why this crisis exists in the West. There's I don't know if you're familiar with sort of Thomas Piketty. He writes about economic changes and how they've broken the sort of social contract between labor and capital. You'll have Chris Caldwell, Douglas Murray, where they write about unrestricted immigration as driving sort of populism and things like that. I write on my own blog, and I don't know that I get it right all the time, but the sort of thesis that I try to propose is that our problems today are rooted in a sort of spiritual malaise, and that we have secularized ourselves to a point that has that we've left people with a world of critical thinking skepticism, but we haven't filled that void or vacuum with a positive and affirmative way of understanding the world, society, their purpose in it, and any transcendent realities to which they should have commitments. And so there becomes no future in this world beyond the self, right? It's just all about me.
Exactly.
And I think what you see with social justice specifically today is an attempt to fill that void where people can live for more than themselves and you have a discourse surrounding social justice that draws on very transcendental motifs of doing what's right and being on the side of justice and service and living for more than oneself and the types of responsibilities that people have. They're constantly invoking the language of morality. And I think what you see with ethno-nationalism is equally trying to fill that void. Because what conservatives, many of them are looking at their society and saying, well, what can give us meaning? What can give us meaning is our state and the affiliations that we have to the country that we live in. Being an American gives us meaning. Having pride in our ancestors gives us meaning. And mass immigration and the demonization of Western history as if it is completely irredeemable compromises that. And so there becomes very sort of violent fights and disputes around all of those things. But there's searches, and they're ongoing searches for people to try to find purpose and meaning in their life.
Yeah.
And Muslims have basically found themselves in the midst of all of this dysfunction. And what they're doing is they're attaching themselves and tethering themselves to what I think is simply a fashionable current of the moment. But they do so in ways, and you know, especially on the left, part of this is this idea that my principle, sort of the cardinal identity that I observe myself off of, is that I am part of a marginalized group that has been a victim, and that I am a victim. And Islamophobia is central to that internalization of victimology and victimhood. And I actually think that what that can do is it can turn Islam into just another political football of the moment.
Yeah.
So it trivializes belief. It trivializes the relationship that one is supposed to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it predicates one's religion and one's religious identity on the basis of political debates that themselves aren't often seriously justified and are in fact quite diluted on the basis of belief, because we don't have, if you look at many of sort of the Muslim civil rights circuit, it is not based on a strong notion of normative commitments. And the reason behind that is that the common argument is, well, you know, if someone's going to do Islamophobia, they don't care whether you're from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah or if you're Shia, or they don't care if you're Qadiani. They don't even care if you're Muslim, right? They don't care if you're Sikh, right? And so we just need to have this sort of big tent understanding of Islam for political purposes. And Islamophobia is sort of the attendant discourse that draws on that. But the implications of that is that it sort of reinforces in people's minds the notion that our Islam is actually quite plastic, that it is broad-tented, that it's all about diversity and pluralism, and you know that it doesn't have a structured meaning behind it, nor is it revolving around the idea of submission, which is what Islam is. And so we have to figure out very seriously, I think right now, how to be political actors that can be sensitive to Muslims who are facing discrimination and difficulties, who may not be as committed, understandably so, without internalizing that as a true and authentic definition of what Islam is supposed to mean for people. Because when Islam does not mean submission to God, it will invariably become cheapened. And I think we're seeing a very serious cheapening of Islam, wittingly or unwittingly, on the basis of political programs. And these are things that are being done by social justice actors and traditionalists, both. I see this as being something that many people are falling into, sometimes genuinely and honestly. But because they want to counteract what they see as problematic politics, they make the locus of their individual definition some short-term political gain, and this notion of me being a victim, which itself has all sorts of problems on its own.
Yeah. Well,